Have you ever wondered where wine came from? And who was the first person to ever drink wine? And what about the word wine? Where'd that come from? And to decant or not decant? That's the question we're going to answer this week on The Average Wine Enthusiast.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Mike LaPlante, and I'm the Average Wine Enthusiast. This week, I thought we would take a look back. You know, we're all on a wine journey here. I thought it'd be interesting to see where the journey began for humankind as far as wines go. Well, it turns out that journey started about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. We know that nomads roamed the area around the Mediterranean Sea, and they fermented the juices from wild berries and wild grapes. This makes me think of what would make anybody put something in their mouth that basically consisted of rotting juice, but I would have to think it had something to do with the fact that you want to stay alive, so you put stuff in your mouth that it may be rotten, it may not be rotten. So I think that may be where wine actually began. There's a lot of things that I can think of, like, mushrooms. Why would you think you can put a mushroom in your mouth? Well, because it looks like it might be edible. You could catch a buzz from it, you could die from it, or you could just fill your belly with some mushrooms. I think wine in those early days was the same way. As folks started to settle down, as it were, they landed in Egypt. And a lot of the fruits that were first cultivated by humans on a large scale, on like an agricultural type industry, were grapevines, fig trees, and olive trees. And those industries, especially the wine industry, created a trade. And a lot of folks believe that a lot of the commerce-based things we have in place today were because of the wine trade in Egypt. Stuff like money, stuff like contracts, commercial professions. All those things were started because of the wine trade in Egypt. Another interesting fact about the wine trade and the wine industry in Egypt is the pharaohs began to refine the techniques that were used to grow grapes. Not only to grow grapes, but to make wine. And some of those techniques to make wine are in place to this very day. It just boggles the mind how the civilization that existed in Egypt thousands of years ago were able to create stuff that we still use to this very day to enjoy wine, and a lot of other things, of course, as well. Then they, of course, took their wine and sold it along the shores and the cities that are lined along the Mediterranean Sea. And one of those places, of course, was Greece. Now, the Greeks were, of course, they controlled a good chunk of Europe back in those days. Or it wasn't Europe at the time, but whatever they called it back then. They, of course, took those vines and brought them everywhere where they thought they could settle down and take over the people who were living in any given area. And one of those areas was Italy. And of course, they realized that Italy had some of the primo land and the best places to grow grapes and make wine. It began to be the hub of all the wine industry on the Mediterranean Sea. And the headquarters, the main hub of the wine industry, was a place called Pompeii. Pompeii was, of course, in Italy. And unfortunately, in the year 79 AD, Pompeii got decimated by the volcano, and there was no more Pompeii. And there was a lot of the wine industry, of course, got wiped out, a good portion of it. So the Greeks and the Italians realized that we can't put all our eggs into one basket, because that basket may get overrun by lava, and then we don't have any more wine. So they went out and started growing grapes everywhere in Italy. And of course, they realized that a lot of places in Italy were very good places to grow grapes that would produce primo wines. it got to such a point that grapes were growing everywhere, and there was a lot of other crops that were probably suffering because everybody was growing grapes. It got to the point where the emperor at the time, I think his name was Domitian, he said, no more grapes in the ground. You grow another grapevine and you're going to get, I don't know, prosecuted or killed or thrown in jail. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it was a crime to plant grapevines after a certain point. And of course, this led to keeping track of where vines are at, which of course we still do that today. We know which grapes are growing at any given place in any given wine region. So that's another thing that has lasted many centuries, millennia. Also, the Romans, of course, they had the Roman Empire and they conquered much of Europe. And of course, they took their vines and their wine with them to the places that they were conquering, Eastern Europe, Spain, Germany, and of course France, where they realized some really good wines can grow there as well. And it's just interesting to see as we check out the history of wine that these places still flourish. Their wine industry still flourishes because of the Roman Empire bringing in the vines and allowing them to, flourish and of course develop a whole industry in Europe that revolves around wine. I hope you enjoyed that little history lesson we just had there. It may put in perspective your own journey that you're having with wine and how other folks had their journey and where they may have went.
Okay, now that we have a history lesson behind us, why don't we just skip math class? We'll make up for it later. And just enjoy some wine. Seriously, what I want to talk this week about was decanting, just a little bit. To decant or not decant. For the most part, if you have a red wine that you didn't make yourself, you're going to want to decant it. For one thing, decanting's fun. It's fun to pour the wine into your bottle or into your decanter from the bottle. And that's basically what decanting is all about. Why decant? Well, it's a good place for your wine to open up. It lets it open up probably a little faster than allowing air to come in this little hole. Also, when you're pouring the wine into your decanter, as it's getting poured in there, depending on the shape and design of your decanter, it's being exposed to more oxygen. More oxygen is being forced into the wine, of course, allowing more aromas and fragrances and just letting it open up in general as you're decanting it. The actual act of decanting does a lot for the flavor and bringing it's a big improvement from pouring that wine. As soon as you pop the cork off, pouring it into your glass, pour some into a decanter, pour some into a glass. It's better to have decanted it than to not decant it. And it's like I say, it's a great place to let your wine open up. It's also attractive just sitting, on your table with some wine in it. As far as white wines go, there's not a lot of white wines out there that I would consider decanting. Myself, I'm not, like I said before in a previous show, I'm not a huge white wine drinker. But I think that if a white wine is worthy of cellaring, and it has been cellaring for a little bit, then I would consider decanting that as well. The types of decanters you get, it doesn't really matter. It's just your personal taste and preference. This one I think we got at an estate sale when I was in Toronto. You can find them at your favorite kitchen supply stores. There's also lots of wine stores out there, and you can get them online as well. The thickness definitely varies. You can get cheap ones online, and the thickness of the glass is different, of course, depending on how much money you spend. You can expect to spend anywhere between 30 and 40 bucks here in Canada anyway for a decent wine decanter, and you can pay probably as little as 20 bucks if you wanted to go for the thin glass ones. First, I'm going to pour this beautiful Santo Terrer Tempranillo into the decanter. This was it's a 2012, just bought it at the LCBO. It was one of Tina's picks. Tina, obviously being a employee of the LCBO, she thought that this was a good wine for some reason.
However, there's a little anomaly with this that I'm not exactly sure what it means, but it just shows you the different things that could possibly go on in terms of marketing wine. So here we have a wine from Spain. It's a Tempranillo, which is what they make Rioja with. So if you have Tempranillo grapes in the Rioja region of Spain, you get certified and all that kind of stuff, you can call your wine Rioja. However, this is just called Tempranillo. So, and it's Santo in 2012. However, there's some weirdness on the back of the label. It says that this has a nicely lifted sweetness, fragrant nose of cedar, greens, cocoa, leather, and spice. It's medium, full-bodied, needs nicely elegant, structured, and focused. Fine tannins, some minerality. This is like a review of a wine on the wine label itself. Very similar to numbers that they put on wines as well. They haven't been doing this forever, let's put it that way. This is more marketing, if you ask me. However, the weird part about this review on the label of the wine doesn't say, where it was grown and who owns the wine or anything like that. Gives a review, says it's 100% Tempranillo, and this review is by D. Lawrenson Wine Align, which is a wine blogging site that I know of. I don't think they have any actual, it's not an actual magazine that you can get, but they have an online presence, and I used to get emails from them all the time, and they have some very useful information there. And Mr. Lawrenson wrote this, though, in May of 2017. How is this possible? We have a 2012 vintage with a 2017 review on it. Well, obviously, they put the label on the wine much later than the wine went into the bottle. So we could have put any old label we wanted on here. We could have called it Wine Align's wine, but that ain't any good. You want something that's that says Spain or Tempranillo or something. I'm not exactly sure. But like this one is under 20 bucks. It's a 2012, supposedly. How do I know that? I know the label that's stuck on the back is 2017. Something's fishy, wouldn't you say? I don't know. But anyway, we're going to decant this. And I'll go through it with you. Here we go. So you can decant by pouring the wine over the side, into the side, and you can see how it, doing that, breaks up the wine and spreads it out. This one here, you can also pour it slowly over this little thing. That also breaks it up. I wanted to put this over here for my second camera. So pour it on that side. See how it breaks it up? Or you can pour it into the middle. Slowly and surely. We'll talk more about decanting in the future, I'm sure, and more about the craziness that's going on in the wine industry. Anyway, I hope you liked this week's episode. I'm Mike LaPlante, and I'm the Average Wine Enthusiast.